Is this the point, or are we past the point now where this is all becoming satire? And if we are engaging in satire, how much as well should we be concerned about reaching these folks empathetically and trying to win them to our side?
I think the danger of satirizing, like I was trying to say in the speech, that actually a lot of the social justice movement are good people and well-intentioned people. And of course, comedy also always has an element of cruelty about it, because you're mocking people. And so obviously, in a sense, that can put people's backs up. But what I hope, what I really hope is that what it does achieve is that it allows them to see the way in which others perceive them, the way in which the majority of people perceive their excesses. And I think that's quite a positive thing to do. And I'm hoping that will... But like you say, there are absurdities within the social justice movement that are almost beyond satire. They're too close to the reality. And in that respect, on the one hand, you could say that makes it easy to satirize, because sometimes what I'll do as Titania is just literally re-echo something they've said. There was one tweet by Rosanna Arquette where she was talking about how ashamed she was of being white and how she hates herself for it. And I literally cut and paste that and put it out as Titania. And a lot of people didn't notice. So you can just literally replicate what they do. But what I tend to like to do is exaggerate it just enough so some people still think it's real and everyone else knows that it's fake. That's the way I like to do it.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, but like you say, it is if things keep accelerating at this rate, then, and if people are afraid to laugh at it, I mean, that's the other problem, is that I think a lot of social justice activists react in such an aggressive way if you mock them. People are scared to mock them. It makes them immune to mockery,
Well, I would say that, do you think that there's been a turn? And I would just notice from, we've all walked through the crowds of these Extinction Rebellion that's here in London. And a lot of the folks that are affiliated with that were folks that in some instances were affiliated with Antifa a number of years ago in terms of the management. But do you think that the Andy No situation, Peter and others, really created a turn to where they understand that they jumped the shark in terms of the physical backlash?
I don't think that they jumped the shark. I think that they think this silly dancing, etc., which is not a ritual of your people. I think that this process, this thing that they're engaged in right now, I don't think that they understand how truly... It's not just that it doesn't do anything, it actually works against their interest. Because normal, rational, sane people will look at this and say, how is this contributing? You have a bunch of people acting like weirdos. What is this doing? Like, if they were out cleaning up, picking up plastic or something. But I think the essence of your question is there a cultural moment now? Yeah. Is there a turning point in which certain watershed events have happened? And you mentioned the Andy No thing when he was assaulted in Portland, and you've mentioned, I think the Dave Chappelle comedy show is one thing. I think the Bill Burr comedy show is another thing. And I think that the overwhelming majority of people, to be very blunt with you, are just plain sick of this shit. I think we are in the majority, and I think we're exhausted by it. And I think it's just the fringe minority on both sides that is preventing us from any kind of productive politics and dialogue. And I do think this is a cultural moment. I do think that right now we have a chance to dislodge this, as Jim mentioned in his talk, this virus, this kind of cognitive virus that's parasitized all these systems. I do think it's a cultural moment.
And what would you say in regards to the response? I know that the way that I first saw Titania McGrath was through someone who was a woke Christian, who had tweeted out one of your...
in sincerity?
Yes.
It was, okay. That's great. That's a great result.
Yes.
I'm not sure. I mean, I would like to think you're right, that we're at that tipping point, because I do know that the genuinely woke group are the minority. They always have been the minority, but I think because they've, like I tried to say, they've infected so many powerful positions, it makes it really difficult to combat. And I agree with you that most people do think it's ridiculous, but I think the way that anyone in power doesn't like to be mocked. I mean, President Erdogan in Turkey, he'll just lock you up if you mock him, you know?
Right.
But the way that the social justice movement does it is that they will hound you on social media, they'll contact your employer, try and get you fired, they'll damage your livelihood, they'll do all this kind of thing. I mean, it's all very well for someone like me, because I'm a comedian, I do get to say whatever I want. And no one is censoring me. I'm not censoring myself. But most people are. Most of my friends who have normal jobs are talking to each other, are joking with each other at work through WhatsApp. They're encrypting their jokes because they're worried that someone might read it and misinterpret it and they'll lose their job and their livelihood. So the pressure is not, whereas someone like Erdogan or a tyrant, the pressure is to lock you up. The way that the social justice movement achieve this is by this public shaming pressure. So I'm not so sure that it will turn that way because people are frightened to criticise a frightening group of, let's face it, bullies.
Mike?
Yeah, I've personally noticed back home that there's this difference between the public self and the private self. When you're behind closed doors with friends, you talk about things very differently than you do
Right.
Outside in the public. And there is this sense of what I know about the world and how I would like to talk about the world and then how I have to talk about the world on social media and how the media is actually talking about the world. I think the majority of people are rational and they think that this stuff is absurd. But the strange thing is that the establishment and places like The Guardian, it's like they don't even understand that it's absurd. And it's really strange what's happening behind closed doors in those places.
Well, they're only talking to each other, aren't they? I presume. And they don't realise how silly it is, I guess.
Are we past Orwell?
In what sense?
Well, where he would actually take things, let's say in 1984, in regards to...
It's so much stranger.
It is.
I think people at certain journalists, it's been such a gradual creep that I think certain journalists have become onion journalists and they don't even know what happened. It happened just so slowly. They were writing genuine pieces and then all of a sudden they were writing onion pieces and they were submitting them.
Yes.
As if they were real.
Have you noticed they found a way to undermine the Orwell comparison? So now what you get is, oh, that's such a cliche, that's so predictable. Why don't you go on about Orwell a bit more? But it is exactly what it is. I mean, it reminds me of Christopher Hitchens when he talks about he was going to one of the so-called axis of evil countries, and he said, I won't use Orwell. I won't compare it to Orwell. But then something happened. You know, the police intercepted him, and they wouldn't tell him why. And he said, they make you do it. They make you use that comparison. As Titania, I put out a tweet saying, I wish you'd stop going on about Orwell. I've just read 1984, and actually there's loads of good ideas. You know? And I think they do think that. It's what Douglas Murray is saying about in his recent book about, like, you know, these are people who are, it's what you were saying earlier, Michael, about people are expecting you to say what you know not to be true.
Right.
They are making you say 2 + 2 = 5.
Right.
Because that is a form of power.
Right.
And that's very, very disturbing to me. So, yes, it has, to risk a cliche, reached Orwellian proportions. We're not in authoritarian world yet. But we can see the signs. We can see the cracks in the armour, you know?
We're pretty close. There's something called a bias response team. And
yeah, Peter spoke about that.
It's about responding to bias. Like, that's... If you just take 2 steps back from that is insane. And it's like Orwell, the Ministry of Love, was the most dangerous ministry. And then you look at Google and they've got the Ministry of Cuddles and Care and puppy dogs. And then they're the ones who are censoring.
Oh, Twitter has got the Trust and Safety Council. How frightening is that? That's straight out of Orwell, right?
So I guess the big question should be is whether right now we have already reached reductio ad absurdum.
Yeah.
You know, or do we have much further to go?
I think we've got much further. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm not going to predict this, but you know, after Donald Trump's election, I mean, whichever way you voted or whatever you think about that, I would have thought that the left and the Democrats would have reflected a bit and thought, where did we go wrong there? Is it possible that calling millions of people deplorables doesn't work as a persuasive tactic? Is it possible that telling all men that they're all rapists in waiting, is it possible that these things aren't good? But they didn't. They just doubled down and they made it even worse. And they've gone the other way. So you've got Kamala Harris the other week saying, well, 2020 is not going to be the same as 2016 because people are woke now. No, they're not. You and your mates are woke. No one else gives a damn. And you're going to find out come election time.
Mm-hmm. Chip?
That's kind of the thing, right? Is the difficulty with that, and this is what I hear all the time, is, I thought 2016 Trump being elected and so on would be a wake-up call to the Democrats, to the left. And I hear people frequently online saying, well, we've just got to keep teaching them the lesson, keep teaching them the lesson. And the problem is that the way that the woke narrative works, the social justice ideology works, is that electing Donald Trump was the biggest single piece of evidence you possibly could have handed them for their ideology. Their belief is that society is secretly racist, secretly sexist, secretly misogynist, and it all hides just under this nice, secret surface. And then it manifests kind of like it just can't contain itself, and it pops up and somebody does a racist thing, or it has to be dug for, and that's why you have to go look at how many black authors versus how many white authors versus how many Hispanic authors versus however many, whatever, are being taught across a literature department. But that the bigotry is there, and that people secretly in their private lives, but not in their public lives, are racists, are misogynists, are sexist, and so on. And then all of a sudden you have this candidate that comes up that was, whether it's true or not, very easy to paint with those narratives, and he was elected. It's the single biggest piece of confirmatory evidence for the batshit insane claims that social justice makes about how society operates that could have been put forward. So it's not so much that they double down as they're like, see, we told you. So having gone for 2 years, I guess, a little over 2 years now, into the social justice ideology rabbit hole, and really, I mean, frankly, kind of like Titania or you or somebody between the two of you, I kind of learned to think like they did. And I immediately can look at these things. It's like I have a foot in both worlds. I got to be careful not to manspread. Hang on. I am a prodigious manspreader. Watch out. It's brutal. So with a foot in both worlds, it's like I can see very clearly both sides of that and understand very clearly why, from the ideology of social justice, what the people on the far fringe left are thinking, that they are thinking, oh my God, we were right. We have our evidence, finally, we are right. And so it's a difficult moment, as well as being whatever other kinds of moment it is, because there's this really weird, almost narrow path that has to be walked, where we have to figure out how to rebuke and refute and expose and explain and give alternatives to whatever it is that is going on with social justice ideology. But the method can't be so coarse as to do what they kind of earned, which is to reject it utterly at the ballot box, because they see that as proof. I'm not sure what the resolution to that is. And I will go a little further and make a prediction. My guess is that, supposing there's not some weird legal thing, that Mr. Trump has a solid 50-50, maybe 60-40 shot of being reelected next year. And if he does, you will not see them rethinking. You will see them believing that their theory has been confirmed beyond all doubt.
Right. In other words, it's almost like a confirmation bias in some sense, to where whether something happens where it doesn't happen, it's still a confirmation of whatever they believe to be true. Yes, ma'am. Yeah,
I tend to be a little bit more optimistic than everybody else, which isn't hard, to be honest. I'm not sure that we've got great political solutions coming up immediately, but I think things are starting to turn on the level of ideas. I think partly because the whole social justice thing has got so much clearer. It's getting harder and harder your average liberal, moderate, to say, well, this isn't really a problem or it's just a fringe. They're having to say something about it. So I think that we're seeing a pushback now. I think we're seeing people getting more confident. We're hoping to keep speaking out, to connect more people, to make people more confident. And I'm thinking the pushback has started. But what my worry is at the moment from my position is that what we're going to push back with isn't necessarily going to be a liberal solution. I'm afraid that it could be a populist solution, an anti-intellectual solution. I'm concerned about people wanting to shut down universities. I'm concerned about traditional gender roles getting a big surge because of the whole blank slateism on the other side. So I'm concerned about an overreaction in ideas, which could actually set us back quite a long way before the civil rights movements if it goes too strong. So my thoughts are we just have to keep trying to push this liberal, evidence-based Enlightenment philosophy and push back at both the left and the right if they're threatening that.
What would be wonderful is if we actually started new discourses. I think one of the things that we should think about in a sense of place is that we are here right now where the birth of actual liberalism took place, like right here. And what would you say that Gladstone and some of his other contemporaries and those that came just after him, what would they think of what is currently happening now? The liberals.
I'd like you to answer that one.
Yeah. What's your Michael? What's your answer to that?
Well, I think that they would properly identify it for what it is, because the fact that they're coming out of a period of course, the monarchical episcopate concept, both within the Anglican Church and out of the monarchy. Of course, they're coming through a time where the Victorian age and so forth was just kicking into high gear. I think that you would be looking at a time where the monarchy still ruled across Europe. World War I had not yet taken place. And so this sense of creating some sort of civilian peerism was about. I think if they would look and see what's actually happened and because I think we cannot look at this and call it the left. We can't call it liberal anymore. And we shouldn't be calling it progressive, because it is not. It is regressive. It is mythological in its core. I think that they would look at this and say, we do not want to be pulled back into some sort of state-controlled religious movement, which is what this is. This is the introduction of a new catechism and a new dogmatic that you must follow. Otherwise, much how Smithfield is just a mile and a half or so from here, where the Marian martyrs, of course, were burned, and where William Wallace was as well put to death. But that's happening in essence in a technocratic sense when you are taken off of social media, when you are banned, etc. It's still like having your tongue cut out for speaking heresy. So in essence, you're anathema for speaking against social media or against social justice. So I think that Gladstone and the others would look at this and go, that's obviously not the direction that we want to take, which is, I think, one of the reasons why they did reject, to some extent, Shaw and others that were here that wanted to take them down a very different road, which is more or less where we are ending up now. So, no, I don't believe that Gladstone would be for this. I think that that's one of the reasons why they were building, in essence, monuments to science, if you will, at that time, right? Is that their thought was, well, let's build the Natural History Museum here in London, which was, in essence, a cathedral to science. They would look at this and say, this is completely anti-science. This is anti-knowledge. Let's not go this direction. I think that that's what you would have from Gladstone, personally.
And I mean, at the heart of liberalism is freedom, and the current social justice movement just simply is an illiberal movement. So I don't think they would recognise that. And I think it comes down to definitions. I think a lot of people on the left, who identify as left, are not really left. You know, you have lots of self-proclaimed socialists who are calling on Silicon Valley tech giants to censor speech on their behalf, on corporations. It's incoherent in the way that you can't proclaim to be liberal if you're demanding to censor the speech of others or to restrict press freedom, as the current Labour Party wants to do. So I think it comes to a general confusion about what any of these labels mean, maybe.
Where we have like an actual liberal like Camille Paglia,
right,
who is against this movement, where you have an actual liberal like Jordan Peterson, who is against this movement.
But they don't call them liberals, they call them fascists or whatever. You know?
Right, because he spoke at my event, Jordan Peterson is called a far right, and I guess, please tell my wife, she's Chinese, that I'm a white supremacist, apparently. But, you know, that's the way that they want to make sure that somehow they identify you in a certain way to be able to attack you, or if you are on the stage with me, or whatever the case may be, or if I'm on the stage with Helen, those on the right will try to identify me in a certain way where we might have disagreements, as opposed to people that are getting together to have a discussion. This used to be the popular thing, those of you that are old enough to remember this, back in the 1970s and 80s, is where you would have these discussion programs on public broadcast or on the news channels and so forth, where people with all sorts of different opinions would come together and debate. This is, my parents are here, that's what we would call dinner. You know, with whomever my stepfather would decide to invite over, who would argue with us and so forth. But that's what you did back then, and that was considered healthy. Because you have a healthy environment where people have different views, different opinions, different presuppositions coming together and even leaving disagreeing possibly, but trying to understand one another.
But there has always been a problem on the left, that whereas right-wing people generally, certainly in this country, have always seen the left as being naive, maybe a bit stupid. The left have a tendency to think of the right as evil. And that's always been a bit of a problem going back decades. I remember that when I was young. So, but I think that's why I think what Helen was saying is so important, which is actually approaching people's concerns from empathy and compassion, and actually listening to people and talking to people and not dismissing people's concerns out of hand. Because I mean, if they genuinely believe that everyone who sits with a conservative becomes a Nazi, if they genuinely believe that the country is swarming with Nazis, that's a horrible thing. I wouldn't sit down with a Nazi and have a chat. You know, I'd be terrified. I'd run a mile. So if they genuinely believe that, and if that isn't, and I don't think they're being dishonest. That's why I think I really appreciated what you were saying, because I think it's absolutely right.
Thank you. I mean, we often hear on social media, social justice activists will say that they are exhausted. They're exhausted by the microaggressions, they're exhausted by the kind of language that's going around. And I believe them. I think having been trained into reading society in this way, having that moral imperative to analyse language, find where the racism, sexism, homophobia is, because it has to be there somewhere, I think that is incredibly anxiety-producing. I think it's exhausting. Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff they've written about the increase in suicides, the increase in mental illness, which is going along with this sort of loss of resilience, this ultra-sensitivity.
Yeah. What could we say then, just in practical terms? How do we reach, not the center core that are pushing this, that really know what they're doing, but those that make up the masses around them that are following this movement? How do we reach them effectively?
We have to have conversations with them. I'm hesitant to say this because I've never given up on anybody. I've had so many conversations with so many people about so many things, and just when I thought all was lost, they would come to me a month or 2 months later and say, wow, I thought about that, and it's not about me saying that, it could be Reed or Anthony or anybody. It's just that idea that there's something so pernicious and so vile that locks somebody in a way of thinking and believing when they're told you ought not to speak to this person. All these people tell me I ought not to speak to you. And all these people tell me I shouldn't speak to you.
Right.
But there is something so viciously entrapping about an ideology that demeans or degrades dialogue.
Yeah.
And it has mechanisms to keep the ideology in place. So given the fact that, and we know firsthand, they won't have conversations with us, I think the something to think about is to have conversations with literally everybody else. So I would sit down with a Nazi. I would sit down with literally anybody and have a conversation with them. That said, I acknowledge the cost that comes, the reputational cost. Excuse me, but I'm also 53. I've basically thrown away my career because of the grievance studies thing. I got nothing in front of me. I have really nothing to lose at this point anyway. Talk to a Nazi, talk to someone, talk to granny. There's just no point to it. Except that there is something demonstrative in that when you listen and you do the plan that I kind of laid, you listen and you really say it, and I think Helen's point is right. If you're constantly taught to see grievances and things and problems, of course that's going to be anxiety provoking. Of course you're going to feel like the whole society is. Every single data point in your epistemic landscape, your moral landscape, just proves the things that you already believe, that the whole society is overcome with sexism, bigotry, the patriarchy is everywhere. There's Nazis literally everywhere roaming around, Nazis over there, Nazis over here, Nazis everywhere. Of course that's going to be anxiety provoking. But if someone's not going to have a conversation with you, then there's no corrective mechanism for that. So the thing is, you reach everybody else. And that's what I think we need to start doing. We need to start talking.
I think that's right. I think dialogue, and I think the other thing is not sinking to the level of the worst excesses of the social justice movement, which someone mentioned earlier. Was that you, James, about with the Trudeau example? Was that no? That was Peter. You were saying about how there were videos of him wearing blackface, and all of a sudden everyone's calling for him to be cancelled. But that is the very thing that we say you shouldn't do. And that's just borrowing the tactics of so not sinking to that level, treating people with humanity and dignity, even when they make mistakes, especially when they make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I think it has to come through dialogue.
Yeah, I think also key to that is really what we tried to do here today, which was to kind of put it plainly is, like I said in my talk, let's show people what's inside the box. You have to get past the branding. I'm a dork, and I don't know how dorky I want to expose myself to be, but I've categorized people on a scale from 1 to 5 of how woke they are, and 1s are like absolutely not woke, and 5s are totally the core, what is it, 8% or something they say that it represents of the population. And so the question is, how do we reach the 3s and 4s? Mm-hmm. Right, the people who are pretty deeply sympathetic to these ideas or concerned about those issues so profoundly that they will, kind of go along with it. Or I've had several people reach out to me and say, I believe in social justice. I believe that there are serious issues of race, racism, etc., sexism in society still, and that those need to be addressed. And I don't like the so-called social justice warriors. What do I do? And so there has to be this ability to learn enough about it through events like this or through your own reading or whatever it happens to be able to see inside the box, to get past that gorgeous branding of social justice, fairness, respect, equality, and then help people who don't fully realize what's actually going on here understand the thing as it is. So then you also have to be able to say, well, there's another way. There's another way to address these issues. Helen was overwhelmingly most eloquent about that among all of us today. So hopefully people watch her talks when the videos come out, like 3,000 times, like you do.
Sorry.
I'll watch everybody's talk but mine. But I think that's really important, is that we keep coming back to it, is treat people with respect, be willing to have conversations with people and help them see inside the box. And if you want to know, as Pete would give you a technique for that, boom. A technique for that would be to read it to them. Show them what they say in their own words. Go read something, quote them faithfully in context. Be as fair to them as you can. Just let people see what they say. Because most people have no idea what's under the surface of this thing, and that it's not what they're... I don't want to give this weird conspiracy theory idea behind it, because that's not what I'm talking about, but right. They're very content to let people believe, whether it's because they don't really understand the thing deeply, or whether they're not thinking about it, or because they've changed the definitions and how they think about things themselves. But everybody that I've met that's pushing social justice is very content to let people believe that it's that nice picture on the box and not the really not just bizarre but frightening thing inside the box. And that once you make that clear, people, I mean, I've had so many people since we did our hoax papers, if you will, come up and say, the hardcore feminists, you know, what I, pardon the language, but I call them fuck you feminists, come up to me and say that they're happy about what we did because they believe in feminism, and that crap's giving feminism a bad name. And so people do care, even pretty deeply into those 3s and 4s, deep into the social justice sympathy zone. And once you start doing things that expose what it really is, they're horrified and they want another way. And then we're smart, so we'll start figuring out other ways.
The trouble you're going to have is is it the 1s and 2s? Are they the really woke?
No, 1s and 2s are us.
So the 8s, 9s, and 10s. The problem is we can talk all we like about the importance of dialogue. The truth is that the true sort of high priests of the cult of social justice will not talk to us.
Right.
They just won't. I mean, I've been on debates and things a lot where the organisers have desperately tried to invite someone to counter my position. They just won't turn up because they say if they're on the platform with me, it's legitimising my views and all the rest of it. So actually, we can idealise this idea of discussion all we like, but unless the other side are willing to participate, we won't get anywhere.
Well, that's the thing. You just said the high priests of that movement.
Yeah.
And it would be the same thing as, and I know this is a different perspective, but of what's happened within Christianity and with the massive woke move that's happening there, is that the other side, who used to be with us, we thought, and some of the highest regarded theologians and so forth that have all gone this way, but they will not engage in public dialogue and debate. It just won't happen. It'll happen behind closed doors. There'll be chameleon sorts of ways of trying to appease, but then they're playing both ends against the middle, and they still push left. Push far woke, I should say. I don't want to say left. So I think one of the concerns here is that as you said, the 3s and 4s, the 2s, etc., is that from a Christian perspective, I'm looking at them as being made in the imago Dei. And even though I disagree with them, I'm called to love them. And even though I walk through the crowds in Trafalgar Square and get sneers and so forth, is to try to engage. I think of Peter, who's my friend, who does such a good job. I think, as many of you have met him here this past few days, how he will engage anybody in conversation and with true empathy. And with us as well, to be able to go to them. And you, I believe, because you love the humanity in everybody, and you want to know them, and you want to know their story, is to be able to go to them and reach out to them with love and try to bring them back to sanity. In essence, it's trying to bring somebody out of a deep cult, where you get a cultic mindset, where everything is colored a certain way, to start bringing them back to sanity. And there's a great call to that for us. But what that means is that you will be attacked. You will be slandered. You will be dragged through the mud. And all the things that we have talked about. But you have to be willing to do that for the sake of both that person, for the sake of humanity, for the sake of, hopefully, in whatever way that you want to see it, moving forward and starting new conversations. Would you say that? Would everybody agree? Of course, maybe not from my perspective, but you would agree that that's probably useful.
So I think, and I struggle with this, I know intellectually, and I know, I feel that the way to deal with these folks, I know it's through kindness, but I gotta tell you, it's hard, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I gotta tell you. I'm walking around campus and they file complaints that I beat my family and they do it. I mean, it is hard to be compassionate and kind to people who view you as an enemy and seem to have a pathological hatred of you.
Yes.
And yet won't engage you in a conversation. And I don't want to be that guy who snipes. I don't want to be that guy. And I sincerely do struggle against it, but Here's the thing. This is a movement that has no kindness. This is a movement that is absent kindness. And that's not less reason for us to be kind to. That's more reason. But it's just hard. You know, I mean, it is a struggle to do that.
I think there's a glaring truth here is that it doesn't do what it says on the box.
Yeah.
So I think the way you get the 3s and 4s is just say, hey, can we just look at the results here? Like, honestly, look at the results of these initiatives and break it down. Look at the actual statistics, not the. There's a famous quote: "If you torture the data long enough, it'll tell you whatever you want." And there's a lot of that going on. So I think we just need the help of statisticians and people that know the methods to get toward actual social justice and define the endpoints. I think we agree with where they want to take this thing. I think we all agree with social justice, the lowercase s, lowercase j. If they're not producing results, then you can just point to what's actually happening with these initiatives and diversity boards and all this sort of thing. You just have to show people what's going on behind the scenes.
Would you agree at all with what Murray had stated, I believe, in The Madness of Crowds? And I think the folks from Trigonometry, I think, are here, where he was saying that the train was so close to the station in terms, and I remember this too. I had an Indian tennis coach, and here I am, half Cuban and married to someone who's Chinese, and we're very often in a lot of our gatherings, I'm the only white guy in the room of 300 or 400 people. But it's not that I feel that way, because ideologically, and I love them, and there's care, and we strive together. That was something that was happening, but that's all changed now. Helen, did you have something? I'm sorry.
I don't know to what extent we're going back, because I see a lot of antagonism, but then when we look at statistics, again, like we found recently that despite a lot of back and forth and supposedly jumps in hate crime in the UK, people are more friendly and welcoming to immigrants now than they ever have been. So I think we're often getting a false impression. I still think the majority of people are becoming less convinced by racist or sexist or homophobic ideas, but I do think that this the kind of language and the kind of polarization that is going on is getting in the way. It's not letting us actually progress as we should. We've all got to pay attention to the children tantruming on the fringes of both sides, when we should just send them to bed and have the reasonable people talking to each other.
I think the question is who are the reasonable people?
Well,
now,
we are, obviously.
I mean, I think a lot. I often just think to myself, can we just have the adults back in the room, please? I just see this all the time. I mean, we're constantly told, in terms of what you're saying, we're constantly told that hate crime is through the roof and everything. But we all know experientially that Britain is one of the most tolerant countries in the world, and we just know that we're all horrified when we see a homophobic beating or anything like that. We're all horrified by this. And of course now, as I mentioned earlier, the police are recording non-crime as part of their crime statistics. So I don't know how much we should lend too much weight to that. And then of course during the whole Brexit, I don't want to get into that because that's going to be a big issue.
Be careful.
But through the whole Brexit campaign, you had the media continually continually telling the public that there are 17.4 million racists in our country, which of course emboldens the few racists there are to suddenly think there's loads of us, so we can go out and shout awful things at people, right? So yes, I believe there probably was a rise in hate crime after Brexit, but it was because the media were telling everyone that we're a racist country when we're not. I think maybe it's about positivity and being realistic about these things and not elevating things, elevating statistics and things like that. That's what I think.
I'll take a stab off of the back of what you said. So the who are the we? I'll tell you who the we are. The we are the people who agree on the rules of engagement. That's who the we are. That's the we.
Right. Well, that's That's just basic critical thinking. That's why I think if we restore that to schools so that people know, once you've thrown an insult, you've lost that argument. That's a start.
Pretty low bar.
Yeah, that's a start.
The we are those who do not perpetrate physical violence, throw things, etc. The we are those who don't disinvite people. The we who don't bring bullhorns and to shove people down.
Yeah.
So we know the rules of engagement.
Well, actually, even more than that is engaging in good faith.
Engaging in good faith.
90% of the arguments I get into are, obviously on Twitter, are people telling me what I secretly think. Right. So I'll make an argument. I'll say, that's just a cover for your racism, and then I'm saying, well, I'm not racist. Yeah, you would say that if you were racist. It's like, so they're arguing with a phantom that they have created in their mind, and I end up having to defend this monster of their creation. And I think we've all been in that position, haven't we? And that's not engaging in good faith. And you can't argue with someone like that. It is impossible to argue with someone who won't argue with what you're saying and taking you on face value.
That's one of the issues, is that unfortunately people have become professional straw men builders. And then once they build the straw man that they're saying represents you, they continue to attract the straw man, and you keep on saying, no, back over here, this is what I really believe. And you spend your time to, and you're like, all right, we're done. Yeah. Because that's not what I believe. And again, what we would say is don't throw your pearls before swine, right? But I think one of the issues is that I think over the past 25 to 30 years, what has become a real tradition, both in the UK and in Europe and in the United States, is that we're raising children and we're not raising adults. And unfortunately, we have adults that still think like children to some extent, that are in their 20s and 30s and so forth, and they haven't moved to an understanding of, well, this is adult behavior. This is the way that we should think. This is the way as a society that we should move forward. This is the way that we should talk with one another. This is the way that we should respect one another. This has all changed, and we still act like children in our discourses.
So it is an educational issue, because if we have an infantilized culture, it must come back to education.
Right.
I think.
I think the educational methodology is possibly one of the issues.
I mean, that would be James.
Yeah. What did you want me to say? Well, we're going to continue to have an education issue from all the stuff we've been looking at in pedagogy.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things we discovered when we were doing our papers and trying to place them, we really wanted to write more papers in critical race theory. In fact, we got criticized after the fact for mostly hitting feminist journals and not hitting race issues with our papers. But then having claimed that those disciplines have similar problems. And one of the reasons was kind of one of the main ways that we didn't have a whole lot of time to figure out, 15 different disciplines, which is how many we wrote papers in. But we would come up with ideas, sometimes by going and reading volumes of literature and then trying to extend what was there. But mostly it would be Peter and I on the phone, or Helen and I chatting on text, or me sitting on my couch, or one of them sitting on their couch and just spinning off some wild idea, and then you chase the idea and make it into a paper. And we'd come up with these ideas for critical race theory, and then we would try to find a journal to put them in, and all of them are education journals, and we didn't write about education. All of them are education journals. And so, like I talked about in my talk, the critical approach to educational theory has really been entrenched since the 80s in our schools of teacher education. And so we've taught teachers for getting on 40 years that critical methodologies are crucial to creating fair and equitable classrooms and creating fair learning outcomes. And this is where it's all at. So it's either, for most of what we saw as the most, heavily paid attention to literature in the academy, it's either the social justice epistemology, which is how knowledge is produced and what it's for, or it's how you apply that in a context of teaching. We only wrote one paper that was about education, and it suggested that it would be a valuable learning exercise to have the white men sit in the back in silence in the floor wearing chains so that they could experience reparations and get a sense of what it's like to be oppressed as an educational opportunity. And a leading journal, Hypatia, thought that was a wonderful idea. We just didn't get the paper tight enough to get it in. And everything we cited to make that paper go was either something out of that feminist epistemology to justify that this is how knowledge is produced and transmitted, or social justice, because it's more extensive than feminist pedagogy. So it's educational theory, where we would, for example, we were directed toward the character we've cited many times, Barbara Applebaum, who is all about white complicity in that context. We were told that Robin DiAngelo's idea of white fragility is exactly the right reason why students wouldn't like to be told they're not allowed to have their emails answered or talk in class and have to sit on the floor with chains on. That the reason they won't like that is they're encountering their fragility. And we were told that we needed to go look up. We thought, oh my God, there's no way they'll take this paper, putting kids in chains in the floor as an educational opportunity. And we sent it off trying to mitigate for that catastrophe. We thought that there's no way, by saying, well, we'll do it compassionately, using something critically compassionate, intellectualism or something. We'll do it compassionately. And they came back to us with, no, if you do it compassionately, you recenter the needs of the privileged students. So we recommend you look up this educational theorist named Megan Bowler and her pedagogy of discomfort, which is about making people as uncomfortable as possible so you can teach them a lesson. And so this is like Hypatia, that journal that we were targeting with that, wasn't chosen at random for this paper. It wasn't like, oh, we'd love to get one in Hypatia, let's just send it there and see what happens. It was that we had noticed that they are publishing a lot of social justice theory of education articles. It's really what's going on there. These theorists that I cited in my talk came up in other talks. Alison Bailey, Barbara Applebaum, Nora Berenstain. These are education researchers. Mm-hmm. And this is deep in the research that informs how we teach our teachers, and it's completely throughout the administrations and the institutional architecture of how we teach our teachers, who then go and tell us that we need to ask questions in K through 12, that's primary and secondary education mathematics courses, like how can we make mathematics more collectivist? How do data-driven processes perpetuate oppression? You know, so if it's in education, we've got some work to do.
Well, I want to do this. I want to go ahead and skip because we are getting close to close, and I know they need to flip the room for another event, but this is a historic occasion. We are, and those of you that know me or know of a lot of the other events that I've done all over the world, I like to choose places where something is going to happen, where it means something. That's why we're not at a boxy hotel in some, white ballroom someplace. Not to mention, probably good that we avoided white. But what we really wanted to do was to create a historic moment. I'd like to repeat this historic moment next year in the UK and give you plenty of notice that we're going to be here. But this was meant to make sure that we are launching really something from James and Pete called New Discourses. And it's purposed, it's intentional, and I do hope that you'll have an opportunity to look at what is the start, which over the next month or month and a half, 2 months, will be built, which will be newdiscourses.com. But instead of going into all the other things that we have on our schedule that would take stage setup and so forth and that kind of thing, what I want to do is go down the row, and this is how I want to do this. I wanted to go from myself to Helen, to James, to Mike, and then to Andrew, and then Pete close. Folks, if you want to give me anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 or 4 minutes, just something that this crowd can take home. And I'll start, though. And this is what I would say, is the reason that we are here and the reason why I am here with them is because some of the most valuable things and contributions that we've had across different affinity groups has actually come out of the conversations that we have had together in regards to this particular situation. I want you to think of these folks as sociological oncologists, if you will. There is a cancer. It is headed for the pancreas. It's going to spread to the rest of the organs. It is going to invade the body. It's something that can and will kill. And it will kill, and as a matter of fact, I know that Pete likes to use the concept of a vampire ideology. It will transform things. My fear, of course, is that it's going to kill off what we would know of the actual true progress that we have made up to this point as far as mankind goes. That's why I'm sitting with them. That's why I value everything that they're saying, even in disagreements. It's one of the reasons I wanted to keep this very apolitical, is because it really has nothing to do with politics right now. It's about identifying the issue, confronting the issue, and as well, for me, I know I'm more of a pleader, but to plead for people to come back to sanity so we can achieve things as a civilization, as a people. And that's so important because I want to preserve the opportunity to have honest debate and disagreement and challenges within folks. That's not what they're after. They're after one thought, one way of thinking, and this is the only way. So I would like to preserve the opportunity to continue to have conversations, to have discourses, to do those things. But on our current track, that will not be possible. And it is vitally important that we continue to have these conversations. We have pastors that are in the room right now that I'm looking at. We've had folks that are we are Muslims. We have folks that are atheists. We have people that are Remainers and Brexiters. We have people that are from all sorts of different stripes of anything that you can imagine from ideologically, that all agree that this is a massive problem. The asteroid, yes, is headed for Earth in an ideological form. So I would plead for you to continue to listen and to learn and to prepare yourselves, not just so you become the king on Twitter for a day and a half, or that you win an argument on Facebook, but to actually be effective. And I would say this, try to take a day or two during your week. Don't look at a screen. How about go out and have conversations with people? I have a friend here, Joy. I don't know if she's still in the room or not. But Joy goes and has conversations with people all over London the last 2 weeks and engages them, even in disagreements and so forth. Try that as well. But yes, thank you for allowing me to share the stage with you. Helen?
Thank you, everybody, for coming and for supporting us and having so many different views and interesting things to say. I think that one thing we've got to do, as we are all so different, is just try to reclaim our stake in what is social justice. Don't let that term be taken away for one particular fringe movement on the left. We all have a say in what is social justice, and I think we need to be more confident about that. The fear of being called racist, sexist, or homophobic, or a more material fear of losing your job is not an easy thing to deal with. But for those of us who can speak out in whatever way that we can, try to do this more confidently. Try to say, I also care about my fellow human beings. I also want social justice. I disagree with the way that you think we're going to do this, and I'd like to discuss that with you.
Oh, I'm the last. Okay.
Stick with the plot.
All right. It's such a good thing to say. So.
It's going to get better.
So if I had one thing to tell you, I'm thinking it would just be, so here's some good news. You can be friends with people again. Like if somebody is a different something, I don't even care what it is. I don't have to make the lists. You can be friends. It's okay. Just if somebody's going to yell and say, oh, they sat down with a so-and-so and like that crosses your mind, so what? Do it. You can be friends. Reach across aisles, make friends, find common ground with each other, because it's all right. It's actually really enriching to talk to people that you don't agree with, but it's even more enriching to just have nurturing relationships where you don't give a crap that somebody disagrees with you. It really is something that's been lost. I felt it personally in my own life. I remember feeling very much like I could only speak to liberal atheists and be comfortable for a period of my life, and then it was just alienating. I think I was doing it to myself. You don't have to do that, and if somebody else is telling you to do that, tell them to jump in the river. So be friends. Be friends again. Make friends with people. It doesn't even have to come up, and if it comes up, find ways to either discuss it forthrightly or to make jokes around it and navigate where you can go and where you can't, and actually be social and normal with people and stop paying attention to all the things that we keep being told we have to pay more attention to than we actually do. We're all people. We can all be friends. And if somebody says that you're a racist for being friends with the wrong people, they probably mean in some vague, systematic way. And the good news there is that you're not actually a racist. That's different.
What was the scale that you had with the most woke to the not woke at all?
So the people most who are against woke, because I cited it was who's going to agree with us. This is really how I framed the numbers. 1s are all in, 2s are really close, 3s are persuadable, 4s are kind of on the other side pretty far, 5s lost cause.
So it seems to me that the 5s are getting the 3s and 4s by manipulating their feelings of guilt. And so my advice here would be to take ownership of your feelings of guilt, find a productive outlet for them, and don't let people into your heart and head to manipulate your guilt. Take care of it. If you're a little bit racist or you've got these internal bias things, then figure out how to fix it in your own life. Don't join a left-wing utopian cause to come to terms with your own feelings of guilt. Just find a home for it. That's all I've got to say.
Well, I get a lot of messages from people who say, I really, really like what you do, but there's no way I'm going to share it or express that publicly. Right. And even within the comedy industry, I get that a lot from people who they're too concerned about their career, which I do understand. So I suppose my message or whatever my suggestion would be to do with personal courage and to do with... it's very easy for me to say because I annoy people for a living, but just being able to say or register an objection, knowing that there is a danger to doing that. If more people did it, you would have this kind of safety in numbers thing. I think if fewer people were capitulating, when someone says, I don't like this opinion, it makes me feel unsafe, to just say, well, I'm sorry, that's your issue. Just not capitulate to that university, people who run universities, people who run businesses, just say, well, that's your problem. You deal with that. And also to not be afraid of this guilt by association fallacy. It goes back to what you're saying, James, to be seen in public with someone who disagrees with you fundamentally, it's not contagious. You don't suddenly become a conservative by sitting with a conservative. And by the way, being a conservative isn't a bad thing. It's just a different way of looking at the world. So to be able to stand up for other people's right to have a different worldview without calling them evil. And then finally to read Arthur Miller's The Crucible and remember that those people who stopped and said, hang on a minute, maybe there are no witches, they were the ones that got called the witch next. There is that risk. Be aware of it, but, have the guts to take the risk.
Mm-hmm. Pete, bring us home.
I think the key to solving any problem, the first step to solving any problem is to be honest about it. And I think that there's been an awful lot of dishonesty. I think I've seen that in myself in terms of when friends of mine were attacked in the skeptical movement, I'm thinking of DJ Grothy when he was attacked. I didn't say anything and I didn't stand up for him. And I'm just so ashamed of myself now for that. I think part of the reason that I didn't stick up for him is because I thought if we just ignored these people long enough, they'd go away. We just wouldn't have to deal with them anymore. And then I think that the other reason for that was that I was afraid of them coming for me. I'm not afraid of them coming for me. I'm coming for them. So I think we have to get over this mindset that if we don't act a certain way or we don't apologize when someone gives us guilt by association, we just have to demonstrate parrhesia. We have to speak up when we see an injustice, because if we don't, we are complicit in that injustice. And I want to say that if for no other reason that you should speak honestly and clearly and without deceit, is because it really is true. You simply cannot form genuine, authentic relationships with people if you don't know what they believe. I know exactly what he believes. I don't agree with it. I know exactly what he believes. And I'm happy to debate it and have conversations about it and have probably over drinks. And that's great. And I'll give him a hug goodnight. Yep. And that's what we need to reclaim in society. And that's what we're losing. And I think we need to be honest about it. We need to be honest about the nature of our problems. We need to be honest with what we believe. And yeah, if there are vestiges of racism, or if you have something in you, some gender stuff that you need to get over it, then grow up, get over it. Yeah. But it starts with us being honest. It starts with us being forthright. It starts with us being clear. And I think if we were to do all those things, if those bases were in place, I just think it would be so much better than the alternative of lies and delusion and fabricated lines of literature and people telling us there are just grievances everywhere and there's patriarchy and Nazis running around everywhere. I just don't think that that is a cognitively sane way to live your life. I think it's taking us away from human flourishing. So final word, we can do this. This is totally doable. This is completely achievable.
Yes.
And it starts with us being honest about the nature of our problems and speaking frankly.
And I'll say, and I want to thank all of you. I know from everyone that's here on this panel, we've enjoyed getting to know you personally. There are so many here that have so many different opinions and come from different places, but agree how great this issue is. And I'm telling you how thankful I am to get to know you, to have conversations with you today, to share a meal with you. Now, I would ask that you take that and take what each person has said here and spread it wherever you are. If you're in Cardiff, if you're in London, if you're in the United States, wherever you are, spread that conversation. I would say if you're someone who is involved in a corporation or an affinity group or is reaching people across borders, or you're a pastor, or whatever the case may be, spread this understanding of things to others. This is something that we share, we must do. Thank you so much for coming. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.